In the brisk autumn of November 1963, as the American sky took on a somber hue and the air vibrated with both anticipation and trepidation, a dark chapter in history was about to be etched in blood. President John F. Kennedy, charismatic hopeful and a symbol of progress, rode through the streets of Dallas, Texas, unaware that destiny was setting in motion a chain of events destined to shatter an era of optimism and plunge a nation into a vortex of mystery, conspiracy, and enduring enigma. The calm before the storm. The morning of November 22, 1963, dawned with an eerie tranquility. In Dallas, a city of contrasts where bright hopes mingled with underlying discontent, the streets hummed with life. Cheerful crowds lined the avenues, their jubilant cries echoing against the backdrop of an ordinary day. Yet beneath this facade of celebration, an undercurrent of tension stirred. In dimly lit back rooms, secretive meetings took place, and in quiet corridors of power, voices grumbled over policies that threatened the status quo. Kennedy's smile, his assured gaze, and his stirring rhetoric had captured the imagination of millions, but not everyone was enamored by his vision. In the shadows, figures with hidden agendas prepared to act, a cadre of intelligence operatives, rogue elements within government, and even members of organized crime. The stage was being set for an act of violence that would leave an indelible scar on the American psyche. The fateful day. As the presidential motorcade wound its way through the streets of Dallas, an almost supernatural stillness blanketed the scene. The procession was a carefully choreographed spectacle, a moving tribute to democracy, punctuated by the cheers of adoring citizens and the vigilant presence of security details. Yet, amid the orchestrated pageantry, fate was preparing its dark hand. It happened in an instant. A single, echoing shot, piercing the calm and fracturing the illusion of safety, rang out across Dealey Plaza. In that split second, time seemed to decelerate. The jubilant atmosphere turned to chaos, as disbelief and horror spread like wildfire. For countless witnesses, that moment became a nightmare etched in their memories, a moment when the hopes of a nation were violently extinguished, leaving only questions in its wake. The web of conspiracy. In the aftermath of that fateful afternoon, a whirlwind of investigations, conflicting testimonies, and a myriad of theories began to surface. The official explanation, as delivered by the Warren Commission, pointed to Lee Harvey Oswald, a solitary figure with a troubled past, as the lone assassin. Yet, for many, this narrative was too simplistic, too convenient. A growing chorus of dissent challenged the lone gunman theory. Some argued that Oswald was merely a puppet, a scapegoat manipulated by darker forces lurking behind the veneer of American democracy. Whispers of clandestine meetings, shadowy government factions, and the murmur of conspiracies circulated among journalists and insiders alike. Was the Kennedy assassination a meticulously orchestrated plot, conceived in the hidden halls of power rather than the open streets of Dallas? The veiled players. As investigators peeled back the layers of the official story, several alternative theories emerged, each more intricate than the last. One of the most persistent theories implicated the Central Intelligence Agency. Critics of the agency suggested that Kennedy's foreign policies, and his perceived softness during the Cold War, had made him a target for those who believed that only a more hardline approach would secure American interests. Was it possible that rogue elements within the CIA had engineered the president's demise to further their own agenda? At the same time, another narrative took shape, a narrative that placed organized crime at the heart of the conspiracy. Kennedy's aggressive stance against the mafia, particularly through his brother Robert's relentless crusade, had earned him powerful enemies. Some conspiracy theorists posited that elements of the mob, in a secret alliance with disgruntled insiders from the intelligence community, orchestrated a fatal strike against the president. In smoky back rooms and hidden alcoves, deals were said to have been struck, deals that would forever alter the course of American history. But the intrigue did not stop there. The FBI, led by the formidable J. Edgar Hoover, found itself under a microscope of suspicion. Many questioned the thoroughness and transparency of the investigation, pointing to glaring inconsistencies and missing pieces of evidence. Was there a deliberate effort to obscure the truth, to bury the real story beneath layers of bureaucratic obfuscation? As questions piled upon one another, the image of a grand, multidimensional conspiracy began to crystallize in the public imagination. Voices from the shadows. Over the years, as the immediate shock of that tragic day faded into history, an ever-growing legion of voices emerged from the margins, whispers of former insiders, retired intelligence operatives, and intrepid investigative journalists. In hushed tones and clandestine interviews, these voices recounted tales of secret memos, coded communications, and meetings held behind closed doors. They spoke of a shadow government, a cabal of powerful individuals, politicians, military officials, and corporate magnates, whose interests lay far beyond the welfare of the public. One such account described how, in the days following the assassination, unverified reports began to surface of covert gatherings in secluded locations. These were meetings where the fates of nations were discussed in cryptic language, and where the true nature of power was revealed in fragments. According to this narrative, the assassination was not the act of a lone madman, but rather the final move in a high-stakes chess game, a move that had been planned and executed by those who lived in the shadows of legitimacy. The grassy knoll, a silent witness. No recounting of the Kennedy assassination can omit the enduring enigma of the grassy knoll. This small, unassuming rise of Earth in Dallas transformed into the epicenter of controversy as eyewitnesses began to report anomalous sounds and suspicious movements emanating from its direction. Amid the clamor of official explanations, the grassy knoll emerged as a potent symbol, a silent, yet screaming testament to the possibility of a second shooter and a more elaborate plot than had been admitted. Photographs and films, taken by the throngs of onlookers, would later become battlegrounds for debates among experts and laypeople alike. Each grain of grass, each shifting shadow seemed to hold clues to a secret narrative, a hidden truth that defied the tidy explanation of a single bullet from a solitary gunman. The knoll, both ordinary and extraordinary, came to embody the deep, unresolved questions that continued to fuel the controversy even decades later. A nation in mourning, and in doubt. As the days turned into weeks and the initial shock gave way to a deep, abiding sorrow, the nation found itself at a crossroads. The official narrative, meticulously crafted by authorities, was met with both acceptance and fierce opposition. Families of the fallen, citizens disillusioned by the stark discrepancies in the investigation, and a media landscape hungry for a more complete story, each group demanded that the truth be unearthed, no matter how deeply it might be hidden. In homes across America, the television flickered with replays of the event. In hushed living rooms, parents explained to wide-eyed children the tragedy of a man who had embodied hope. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of distrust began to spread, a distrust that questioned whether the true motives behind the assassination would ever be revealed. The seeds of conspiracy had been sown, and they would continue to grow into a towering, tangled narrative that defied easy explanation. The story of the Kennedy assassination was not merely one of a single, isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of decades of political maneuvering, ideological battles, and covert power struggles. As shadows of the Cold War lengthened across the globe, the United States found itself at the crossroads of history, its internal and external conflicts merging into a maelstrom of uncertainty. In dimly lit rooms behind closed doors, former intelligence operatives and disillusioned insiders whispered about operations that had extended far beyond the borders of legality. The Cold War, with its unyielding tension and a pervasive fear of communist infiltration, had given birth to a series of covert operations. Operations that in some quarters were deemed necessary evils. Yet, in the aftermath of Kennedy's demise, these very operations became the breeding ground for suspicion. Old photographs, yellowed memos, and carefully redacted files began to surface, each piece of evidence adding weight to a growing narrative that the assassination was not an act of spontaneous violence, but a meticulously planned operation orchestrated by a network of actors who spanned the spectrum of power. Central to many of the conspiracy theories was the role of the Central Intelligence Agency. For some, the very agency charged with protecting national security had, in fact, become the architect of chaos. Critics argued that Kennedy's policies, especially his perceived hesitance in confronting the Soviet threat and his enigmatic stance on Cuba, had sowed the seeds of dissent within the corridors of power. In hushed conversations held in smoke-filled back rooms, ex-agents recalled how Kennedy's approach had clashed with the hardliners, who believed that only a more aggressive strategy could preserve American dominance. The narrative took on a life of its own, that within the CIA, a rogue faction had decided that the only solution was to remove the commander-in-chief. In this version of events, Lee Harvey Oswald was less a lone wolf and more a carefully chosen pawn. His actions manipulated by unseen hands, directing the flow of fate from behind a curtain of secrecy. Documents and testimonies later brought into the spotlight detailed irregularities in the agency's operations, sudden reassignments of key personnel, unexplained gaps in the official records, and cryptic communications that hinted at deeper, darker motives. Was it possible that an agency built on the promise of vigilance had, in a twist of irony, become the harbinger of a national tragedy? Parallel to the allegations against the CIA were the persistent murmurings of organized crime's involvement. The Mafia, with its deep-rooted influence in American society, had long been a formidable force operating in the shadows. Underneath the veneer of respectability, its leaders wielded power through fear, bribery, and a network of corruption that reached the highest echelons of society. Kennedy's administration, emboldened by his brother Robert's vigorous crusade against organized crime, had struck a nerve in the underworld. It was said that the very mobsters who had once enjoyed a tacit alliance with political figures, now saw their interests threatened. The assassination, in this account, was not a matter of ideological differences but a calculated act of retribution. Behind closed doors in secret meeting rooms, figures of the underworld are alleged to have plotted, setting in motion a chain of events that culminated in the tragic day on Elm Street. The narrative woven by Mafia theorists was rich with detail: coded messages exchanged over payphones, discreet handshakes in darkened alleys, and the silent nods of men who had long mastered the art of concealment. Here the assassination was reimagined as a desperate act of self-preservation, a final fatal maneuver by those whose influence spanned, from the backroom gambling dens of New York to the smoggy streets of Chicago. Yet another strand in the tapestry of conspiracy theories pointed its accusing finger toward Cuba. The embers of the Cuban Revolution, which had ignited a fierce ideological battle in the Americas, were still smoldering in the early 1960s. Kennedy's policies toward Cuba, ranging from the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion to the subsequent missile crisis, had left both Cuban exiles and the revolutionary government reeling. For many, the assassination was a direct consequence of these turbulent events. Some theorists contended that factions within the Cuban government, possibly in collusion with anti-Castro elements residing in exile, had sought to strike back at a president whose policies had destabilized the region. The narrative here was as explosive as it was dramatic. Clandestine meetings in Havana, covert arms deals in Miami, and whispered negotiations that straddled the fine line between patriotism and treachery. In this version of events, Kennedy's assassination was the inadvertent fallout of a larger geopolitical game, a collision of revolutionary fervor and the stark realities of international politics. The Cuban angle, with its blend of idealism and ruthless pragmatism, added yet another layer of complexity to the already intricate mosaic of theories. As if the domestic players weren't enough, some narratives reached beyond American borders to implicate foreign intelligence agencies. Among these, the KGB, the formidable apparatus of the Soviet Union's intelligence, was frequently mentioned. In the charged atmosphere of the Cold War, every major political event was scrutinized for signs of international machinations, and the assassination of Kennedy was no exception. Proponents of the KGB theory argued that the Soviet Union, perceiving Kennedy's policies as a threat to its sphere of influence, might have orchestrated, or at least facilitated, a covert operation to destabilize the United States from within, although the evidence was circumstantial at best. The idea resonated deeply with those who believed that the struggle for global supremacy often spilled over into the most personal realms of national leadership. The narrative in this chapter is one of intrigue on an international scale, a story where the lines between domestic betrayal and international espionage blurred. Cryptic messages intercepted by intelligence agencies, unexpected trips to foreign capitals, and unexplained contacts with Soviet operatives lent credence, in the minds of some, to a theory that spanned continents and defied simple explanation. No further exploration of the Kennedy assassination could ignore the enduring mystery of the grassy knoll, a small hill in Dallas that quickly transformed into an iconic symbol of conspiracy. As investigators and independent researchers combed through reams of photographic evidence and eyewitness accounts, the knoll took on an almost mythical significance. Reports from that day described strange sounds and unusual movements that seemed to emanate from the direction of the knoll. Was it possible that a second shooter lurked in its shadows? Or could the knoll itself be seen as a silent sentinel, a witness to the unfolding tragedy, holding secrets that even time could not erase? In this chapter, the narrative becomes almost poetic, a meditation on the nature of truth and the elusive quality of memory. Every flickering frame of film and every grain of dust captured by high-resolution cameras was scrutinized, analyzed, and debated. The grassy knoll remained a fertile ground for speculation, its silent presence a reminder that sometimes, the most profound mysteries are hidden in plain sight. As the nation grappled with grief and disbelief, a parallel journey unfolded in the corridors of power and in the minds of determined investigators. The official inquiry, led by the Warren Commission, presented a version of events that many found both comforting in its simplicity and disturbing in its implications. Yet, from the very outset, discrepancies in the investigation, missed evidence, hurried conclusions, and suppressed testimonies planted the seeds of doubt. Independent researchers, journalists, and former insiders embarked on a relentless quest to uncover what the official records had left unspoken. This was a journey marked by late-night meetings in dingy offices, the careful examination of classified documents, and a tenacious refusal to accept a narrative that seemed on its face too neatly packaged. Their investigations were punctuated by moments of triumph, a piece of evidence discovered in a forgotten archive, a whistleblower willing to risk everything, and by crushing setbacks when leads evaporated into bureaucratic red tape. In the ensuing years, as the nation attempted to heal, the Kennedy assassination became a mirror reflecting the collective psyche of a people caught between hope and disillusionment. The official narrative, while comforting to some, was met with skepticism by a growing number of citizens who had witnessed, firsthand or through the lens of memory, the cracks in the facade of certainty. Debates raged in academic circles, on television talk shows, and in the hushed corridors of local diners. Every new piece of information, every newly declassified document or previously unheard testimony, was met with a flurry of interpretations. For some, the evidence pointed clearly toward an intricate conspiracy. For others, it reinforced the notion of a tragic, yet isolated, act of violence perpetrated by a troubled individual. A complex dance that continues to define public perception of the event. It is a dance choreographed by fear, hope, and the unyielding human desire for answers in the face of chaos. In this interplay, every whispered theory and every fervent declaration became part of a larger narrative, a mosaic of voices, each adding a unique shade to the canvas of history.